Welcome to Senate Education on Friday, February 11th, 1:32. We have some committee discussion time with our Ledge Council on three of the bills that we've been working on related to, we're going to start Church and State. We're going to shift to our discussion around school mascots and then miscellaneous education. And then we're going to hear from some teachers on S-162. My hope is that next week, everything goes okay. We'll be able to take a vote on miscellaneous ed and move that and mascots next week. If we can get to a point where everybody's majority is feeling comfortable. Hopefully everybody's feeling comfortable with both, but we'll play it by both. And then Church and State maybe the following week, depending if we have some additional work to do. Related to miscellaneous education, today what I'd like to do is just talk about a couple of the concerns that the Secretary of Education raised yesterday. When we get to that, I'll mention those. And I'm also hoping to tuck away a little, one other item in there if the committee is okay with it, and I'll share that when we get to it. So S-219, we asked Mr. Desmarais to come up with some decision points, some maybe even talking points, some areas for discussion after we heard from Professor Teachout last week. And so with that, I will turn it over to you, Jim, unless I see questions. So I think we're okay to get started.
Okay, so good afternoon. For the record, Jim Desmarais, Ledge Council. So I have testimony posted on your website, which I'll just talk through. There are three. Sorry, I'm joking a bit. There are three decision points in that testimony. The first is whether you go with a certification process or a contractual process. The second is whether you use the term indoctrination. And the third is how you want to deal with dual enrollment. Those are the three key areas. On the first
I just
one,
want to, those of you who have been watching this work, I think understand it's been complicated. I appreciate the committee's efforts. I appreciate Mr. Desmarais and Professor Teachout, everybody who's been involved in this. And so I just want to acknowledge that work. So thank you, Jim.
Yep. Before I start with the first item, I just want to dial back for a second and just make sure to remind the committee the difference between the free exercise clause analysis and the establishment clause. It's confusing. I understand that. You've been operating most of the session looking at the free exercise clause. And that's a pretty fraught area these days because there's so much change going on in that area. But the question asked under the free exercise clause is whether some state action has the effect of discriminating against a religious organization. So state action that interferes with the free exercise of religion, okay? That's the free exercise side. The other side, though, the establishment clause side says, when is it that the state is too enmeshed in religion? At what point is the state too enmeshed in religion? And when a law enmeshes the state too much in religion, it violates the establishment clause. Because the idea is the government can't either establish a church or get too enmeshed in church and religion on the one hand, and it can't interfere with religious rights on the other hand, and that's the free exercise part. So what I've been trying to do in this bill is to try to move the debate a bit more toward the establishment clause for a few reasons. One is more established law. It hasn't been moving around very much. And second, I think it helps your case to have that orientation in your bill. And so what does that look like? Imagine a scenario where your bill or a bill would allow for parents to send their children to independent schools on public tuition, allows that tuition to be used broadly for secular or sectarian. But imagine the system is that the state contracts with those schools directly. So the state is the contracting entity to provide basically a substitute for public education in those parts of the state where schools are unviable, public schools are unviable. So imagine the state contracts with the schools, pays the schools directly, so it doesn't reimburse parents. It's going a direct payment to the schools. And I know you're not going this direction, but takes away parental choice. If those three things happen, I'm quite sure you're under the Establishment Clause, and in that case, I think you've got a strong case to move in that direction. Your bill already has the element that the state would pay directly to the schools. That's in your bill already, not through the parents. You don't want to go obviously with limiting parental choice, but your bill has the certification requirement where the schools have to certify that they don't discriminate, that they don't use their funds for religious instruction, etc. Rather than having a contract, so you don't have a contractual requirement, you've got a certification requirement. And so what I would suggest is to give this bill a bit more integrity against a challenge, is to move your certification process to a contractual process where the independent schools, rather than certifying to the state board, enter into a contract with the state board, where the state board agrees that it will allow public tuition to be used, and the schools agree that they will that they won't discriminate and that they will not use those funds for religious instruction. So it's the same substantive requirements as certification, but has a contractual, it's a contract. And it might be a marginal thing, but I think that helps you push this more in the direction of an Establishment Clause analysis. So the other thing about that is it's consistent with the narrative of your bill. Your bill basically is saying, look, Vermont has a tuition system that is born out of the fact that we don't have public schools in parts of the states that are very rural. It's not like Vermont decided just to have a big choice program, like everybody can either go to public school or independent school. Our system came up because of the lack of public schools in certain parts of the state out of necessity. And these schools are serving a quasi-public function, and therefore it makes sense for the state to contract with them to serve that function. So it's consistent with the narrative of your bill as well. And that narrative is the same narrative that Professor Black talked to you about. And he wrote a whole amicus brief in the Macon case, the Maine case, all about the same fact pattern about how Maine system basically comes out of necessity because they didn't have schools in rural parts of the state. So it's the same kind of argument he was making in Macon. So that's the decision point here is whether you go with certification or with a contract. And again, the reasons that we support that is only because, from my standpoint, I think it helps the integrity of the bill a bit. I don't think it has a substantive difference, in my mind at least, between the two, but the form of it is different. And I think that might help a court, seeing the word contract might help a court move it more toward the Establishment Clause analysis.
So let's pause there. I do want to just clear the air on a couple of things related to, because I think we've heard some concerns early on about the contractual piece. And Jim, you and I have talked a little bit about this. So with the contracting piece, is it that the state is involved in reserving spots at schools for students?
You could do it that way.
Okay.
that was part of the discussion, like by way of an example in the debate in Macon, or argument.
But we could,
And
but it's not
it's just
necessary.
not necessary. I mean,
Okay.
I think you could simply just say, again, that the state will pay public tuition and the schools will agree not to discriminate. I don't think you have to reserve spots or be that specific.
And say something, if you would, about tuition, determining tuition. How does this, if we were to go contractual, is there a shift in how tuition is determined
No,
for the independents, for the academies, anything like that?
no, tuition is set by statute. And you're not changing the statutes that set tuition. And tuition is quite complex in this context because different schools get different rates for different reasons. But all that's in statute and that's not changing.
So the academies or the independents never, I don't know, go to their local school boards and are negotiating tuition in any way, or they are?
They can negotiate tuition. There is a rate set in
Right.
statute, but that can be overridden by an agreement between the school district and the independent school.
I understand. So, but this doesn't remove anything. The contractual agreement wouldn't remove anything between that or interrupt or change the relationship between a school and a school board.
No, the only thing I see it doing is expressing the certification in a contractual form.
So I have one other just final question. I'll send it to Senator Perchlik, and that is, are you talking now about a contractual agreement that would also include the certification, or are you talking about certification and a contractual agreement?
No, just the certification language should be put in the contract. So it's just one thing.
Your questions were the same as mine, so I got my question answered, but I just want to put a flag out there for how these independent schools set their tuition. We heard about it in the task force discussion a little bit. It's kind of wonky, and at some point we might want to wade into that, but I don't think it's central to this bill about church and state. So, but I'll just say that I kind of like this contract approach. I'd support it.
Okay, no, that's good to know. Yeah, and I think what I just want to make sure we're doing is we've had a lot of people in, we've had a lot of testimony. If this is the direction the committee wants to go in, I just want to loop back to some folks and hear from them. Senator Lyons.
Just briefly, so the contract would not change the tuition amount?
No.
Okay. And the contract would not be sort of negotiable. It'll be something that you sign and that's it.
Yeah, I think the state board should come up with a standard form of contract, a very simple form of contract with those certifications basically within it.
Okay, but so I'm just trying to, when I hear the word contract, I also think of negotiation and change, on a yearly basis or a 2-yearly basis, but there's nothing in that. What provisions for the certification will be in statute that would then translate to the contract?
So what would be in the contract is on the state's behalf, an agreement to pay public tuition to these schools. And on the school's behalf, an agreement to not discriminate, to not use those funds for religious instruction, and to accept students on IEP. Same as the certification, just moved into a contract.
And so that would be embedded in statute. So it can't change without a statutory change?
We could do it. We can put the contractual terms right in statute if you like, that's fine.
That's another discussion, but I'm just asking if we can do that, simply because if you make these requirements and then you get a Board of Education that says these are silly requirements, let's just open them up. I'm just trying to figure out what jeopardy that places the state.
Right. Yeah. So this would be a statute. So it wouldn't be something that could just override.
Are
And
we
the way
just
we-
calling, if I may, are we just calling
Just calling it.
approval a contract?
I'm sorry, say again?
Are we just calling approval a contract?
Um,
I mean,
there is an approval process for these schools to go through as well, but part of the approval process would be to sign this contract with the state board.
okay. And say something about parental choice, if you would, if we're, just tell me, that is going to be, because, you know, as going back to Professor Teach Out, I'm also sort of counting votes in my head here.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about parental choice. Does it limit parental choice at all?
No, the contract versus certification has no impact on parental choice.
Okay.
You want parental choice, that isn't changing. The separate question I have for you is whether I have another discussion point about using public funds out of state, but I'm coming on to that one. But
Yeah,
in
we
terms of
can get to that
parental,
one. Yeah, okay.
so I'll come back to that one, but
Yeah, let's come back to that one.
the whole decision point between certification and contract does not affect the question about choice.
Okay. Senator Lyons, I apologize. I interrupted.
No, this is helpful. I think I got my questions answered. Is there anything? So currently the certification. Will the State Board of Education have will they have a decision-making point? Can they deny a contract?
They can deny approval,
Mhm.
right, of the school, both as an approved independent school and as an approved independent school eligible for public tuition. There are two categories now. They
Right.
have to approve both in order for the school to qualify. So, and the contract will be part of that approval process.
Okay.
So they can deny the school, of course, but there are grounds and there are rules for the number of requirements they have to comply with. And this would be one further requirement.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
It's very helpful. Yeah, Senator Hooker.
Thank you. And those requirements, Jim, would be in statute, as you said.
Those are in rule because our statutes give the state board authority to develop rules for approval for independent schools, which they're updating right now. And there are all kinds of requirements around courses being offered and health and safety and a number of requirements for those schools.
Okay. Senator Lyons.
Last question on that.
Yeah.
So do we need to give any direction on the rules around the contract process?
I don't know that we do. Once it's in statute, they're gonna have to
Okay.
adjust their rules to accommodate that. So
Yeah, this is in statute, so the anti-discrimination piece and so on will be embedded.
correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Anything else on this at this point?
So I have one
So-
further kind of side point on this a little bit,
Yeah,
if I
please.
could go there, which does go into a bit of the choice question, but not in relation to this question about certification
Okay.
versus contract.
Okay.
On page 2 of my testimony, I point out a quote from Justice Barrett in the Macon case. And in that case, again, Professor Black was making the point that Maine system, like Vermont system, is unique. It comes out of necessity. It's not a typical choice program. But she says in oral argument, she says, this program, the Maine program, functions like choice, like a school choice program, particularly given that kids can go as far as California into elite boarding schools all over the country with the money. So what she's saying is the choice is so broad in the Maine case and Vermont, because we allow the same thing, that it's not really a unique system, if you will. It's a very broad system, like most choice programs, and it undercuts kind of the narrative in your bill to allow that undercuts the narrative that the reason we use independent schools is because we don't have enough public schools in the state. And when you allow the students then to go to Europe or to boarding schools or out of state, it kind of undermines a little bit the narrative that the reason in the first place we have this is because kids need other schools in Vermont to go to. So
Jim, is that what you're saying now? And I just want to make sure, it's not that I'm disagreeing, but is that in statute? I mean, saying that we don't have enough public schools, that's why we have the system that we've created. I just want to.
no, that's not statute. That's a historical perspective. I mean, that
Okay.
I think if you read the historical literature on the
Okay.
reason we have the academies, and
Yeah.
it's because we just didn't have schools in these places. And
Okay.
so anyway, I think based on her comment and based on the kind of whole free exercise debate, limiting the ability for parents to take tuition out of state might again strengthen your argument. And I realize that students go to adjoining states because they live on the border of Vermont. So you could say, for example, tuition can be used in adjoining states, and maybe even Quebec for the northern border. So you could limit more around Vermont for that purpose. If you did that, I would think you'd want those schools to sign your contract or your certification as well to be part of the system. So I'm just suggesting it again, only because it may strengthen your argument to protect the integrity of the bill. I can't say for sure about anything because
No, I understand. So can you just say something? So the group that I worry a little bit about, the mileage piece, as you and I have talked about, saying is it 30 miles, is it 40 miles? I know that we send students, I'm not, the kid going to California to an elite school is one thing, but the kid that has to taking money to go to Perkins School for the Blind, a school that's dealing with a disability, severe behavior issues, which can be found all over the United States. That's where I get most worried.
Yeah, that's easy to accept.
I don't know how to carve that out because sometimes those, the word elite is, the definition, it's complicated. So you know what I'm trying to get at.
I do. I believe that the students who go to those schools, those are therapeutic schools. Those are schools addressing special education students' needs that can't be met locally in Vermont. There's some programs that deal with very specific and complicated, diagnoses. So,
but I wouldn't define them all as therapeutic anymore, only because in Massachusetts, in Connecticut, there are a number of schools that, again, back to definitions, that wouldn't consider themselves therapeutic, but they're small schools that do particularly well with students who have attention issues, but they're not therapeutic, and they're not. So that's, I just want to be very careful on this because there are kids that I thinking of schools, in particular, I think Massachusetts has some, that a kid with a disability, not a therapeutic school, and maybe it's even a learning disability. Well, we know a number of students that go to Landmark School in Massachusetts. They don't consider them therapeutic, but I don't know if they get there because their school district always just can't do the work or can't, but there's something there that works for the student. And that's where that's what makes me the most nervous. Senator Persley.
Well, I agree with you, except that we're talking only about those students in non-operating districts, basically, because a student that has a public school doesn't have that same opportunity to go to those schools unless they can make the argument that it's what they need.
Right. So if you're in an operating district, you might go to your school board, you might appeal saying my son or daughter cannot be properly educated here. There might be an IEP that can't be met. And then in those cases, students would be able to take their dollars even there and go to one of these schools.
Right,
As
not
a-
typically take their dollars, but the school district that they live
Yeah.
in, would pay that school. They would agree,
Yeah.
make that agreement. It'd almost be like the contract we're talking about. And I think we can just do that for all students. It's like if you can make an argument to your school board that there's not one in state or in a neighboring
Yeah.
state, then you can do that. But I like limiting it compared to where it is today, where you can go to a ski school in Switzerland if you want.
How many of those kids do we have? Do we know?
I go to ski schools in Switzerland.
Well, I know your kids went there, but besides those kids, are there any other kids now that the kids have graduated? No, of course, for the record, Senator Perchlik's children were not educated at the ski schools in Switzerland. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
Assuming there's very few of those, but you just hear about them every once in a while.
I know.
Besides, they should be at ski school in Vermont.
That's right.
There you go.
Right. That's right. Okay, so, and then in the districts in the kingdom and a little bit in southern Windham County and Bennington County, where students are going over the border. And also, I think in the western part of the state, southern Rutland County, I think also some kids go over the border to a New York State public school. In southern Vermont, you get some that go over the border of Massachusetts to a public school, but also there's an independent school that also acts as the public school. Those situations, we could put language around that kind of thing.
You could either do either have permission to go to adjoining states, or if that's too broad, you could do it within a certain mileage of the Vermont border.
The mileage
but-
thing, I just think, is always just a tricky thing for the floor.
Yeah.
And coming up with mileage is a tricky thing. But bordering states, yeah, I don't know. Senator Perchlik?
Well, you could do a mileage where it's clear. So and maybe we don't want to do this because we're trying to do it, but if you did something like 200 miles, it's going to be almost all of New Hampshire and Massachusetts, but you're not like going to New York City. Like if you live in a southern part of Rutland County where the school across the lake or just across the border makes more sense, then I think we want to support that. But do we want to support is a question, and I'm open to it, or either way, like going all the way to New York City, because that's a bordering state, but not that close.
Right.
And
Please.
I would say with schools that we already have a relationship with, and kids are already going to those schools, we might want to comment on
course.
that.
Of course, yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, we could transition this kind of language in. Yeah, I'm comfortable being, overridden on this, but the bordering state feels to me like it's a good first step, and it also gets at what we're trying to do in terms of strengthening the bill. I mean, putting mileage in there over the bordering states doesn't seem to me, Amy Barrett isn't going to say, well, did it have mileage in it? And, I think we're still doing it. Just an idea, and we can keep discussing it. Okay, but generally, I think if we could see some language, Jim, that would do what we're leaning toward doing, would be great. And then we can, if Senator Perchlik is comfortable starting with the state, the bordering states, we can go from there after that. Senator Hooker?
Nope.
No, okay. Let's see. Any other questions on this or on the contract piece? So the contract is just, they're limiting, the terms of the contract would be limited to anti-discrimination and no use of funds for religion indoctrination.
And to accept students on IEP.
Okay, tell me more about that. That's,
That's from Act 173.
okay,
Right,
oh, that's
so
right,
that
okay,
That comes into effect already
That's
next
right.
year. So
Yeah.
you have a year delay in that one, but that would be in there too in that.
That's
hits.
what the whole contract, if I were to explain this to Senators Kitchell and Starr and others that have, you know, some schools in even in my district, that's what that contractual piece would say.
It's just basically the certification in a different form. Signed by
By
both.
discrimination, no funds for religion indoctrination, and then IEPs.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And in terms of out of state schools and the surrounding
Yeah.
states, I wouldn't think that the IEP requirement would work for them. So I think the first two, so, you know, you could require them to sign a contract. They can't discriminate. They can't use the funds for religious instruction.
Yeah.
But the IEP stuff is a very Vermont thing in terms of that whole process. So I wouldn't suggest imposing that requirement on schools that are out of state.
You know, it's interesting, and I just want to raise this because I know it's been raised with the Kingdom delegation in the past. So with St. Johnsbury Academy, and I think I mentioned this to you as well, Jim, when we talked, St. Johnsbury Academy takes students from New Hampshire, and then we want to make sure that, and also there are students that go to New Hampshire. There's some kind of reciprocal relationship there that I just want to also make sure is going to continue to work. I remember that this committee has had this kind of conversation in the past, and there was a fear that New Hampshire would reciprocate with some kind of retaliatory statute that would shut things down. Does any of this sound familiar to you?
Not to me, no.
Okay, all right. I can loop back to the senators in that region. Okay. Okay, Senator Perschlick.
I just wondered if on the out-of-state schools, if it matters if the out-of-state school is a public school or an independent / private school, as far as signing the contract. I could maybe see it difficult to get a public school to sign a contract.
The contract doesn't apply to public schools. It's only a contract between the state board and the independent schools.
Regardless if it's in or out of state.
Yeah.
So if you're an independent school in Massachusetts that you have a student in a sending district that might be going on an IEP, or they may not even be going on an IEP, but it's a school for students with learning disabilities, we're still saying you need to abide by this contract. Yes.
Yeah.
In terms of discrimination, okay, etc. Okay, Senator Hooker.
But as far as public schools in neighboring states, they would already have to comply with the
Anti-discrimination
requirements. Anti-discrimination.
Well, we get back into the whole conversation about whether the Vermont Public Accommodations Act applies to all schools because of the question about whether they are open to the general public, right? So I think that's the reason your bill is drafted the way it is to make sure that even if there are exceptions, they still have to comply. And that would be true for the out-of-state schools too.
Okay. Anything else on this?
Nope.
Jim? Okay.
Not for me. Oh, not for me.
Great. Do you want to indoctrination?
Yeah, indoctrination. So your current bill provides that none of the public tuition will be used to support religious instruction or worship or the propagation of religious views, except for general overview courses. So that language is there because that reflects the holding of the Chittenden Town case. That case did not use the term indoctrination. It used the term instruction or worship. So Professor Teach Out suggested substituting indoctrination for instruction, or you could add indoctrination to instruction. So the two examples of that are, it's in the second page of my testimony. It says, first example would say, none of the public tuition will be used to support religious indoctrination or worship or the propagation of religious views. That's the version that substitutes the word. And then the other option is none of the public tuition will be used to support religious instruction, worship, or indoctrination, or the propagation of religious views. And that obviously adds that word rather than replacing the word instruction. And just from the Cambridge Dictionary, indoctrination means the process of repeating an idea or belief to someone until they accept it without criticism or question. Yeah, so I guess your options are keep the bill as it is, substitute indoctrination for instruction, or keep instruction but add indoctrination. And under those cases, I suppose add a definition of indoctrination.
Senator Lance.
I like the second one, but I'm wondering if religious needs to be the modifier for all of them. And so saying religious instruction, taking out the word or before indoctrination and then putting it in, leaving it in for the last clause. So I'm just voting for the number 2, and I'm just asking if religious should modify each of those. The first 2, religious instruction, religious indoctrination,
Oh, sure. Yep. We can.
that's all.
Yep.
And because the last one's propagation of religious views.
Yep.
How do others feel?
That's clarifying. So yeah,
The second one you feel is more clarifying.
taking out the or,
Okay.
before indoctrination.
So can I ask another question?
Yeah, please.
So, going back to the question about, suppose a student decides to take a course, Religions of the World, and the part of it is experiential. And so this is, it could be very possible, so that the experience might be to go to a Jewish synagogue, go to various churches, and then a mosque, and then experience a Buddhist program. So I'm just hoping that kids can take those courses without that being seen as indoctrination. I mean, is that thin ice?
Well, from my legal interpretation side, I think that would be fine. Because if you said that the kids would get practical exposure by going to 5 different Christian schools, or that would be different. But you're talking about basically a practical survey of different religions, which I think is what this language contemplates being okay.
Okay. All right.
Senator Hooker? I'm sorry, Senator Lyons, go ahead.
No, that's
Senator
good.
Hooker?
I just want to say that when I was religious ed director at my parish, we did that. We went to the synagogue, we went to other churches, and it's, exposure to different philosophies and different faiths, and hopefully respect for all of those. So.
Yeah, and
Yes.
Unitarian services, I remember sometimes they would even Well, yeah, I guess it wasn't necessarily at the education piece. It was of students. It was more sometimes different people of different faiths would come in. But yes. Okay. Center Alliance.
Well, I mean, I picked number 2, but I'm wondering what are the consequences of having indoctrination in there? Is that, or of having instruction and worship? I mean, the differences between those two for me are not huge.
I guess as I read this, I'm looking at the words propagation of religious views.
Yeah,
That to me seems like indoctrination to me. So,
okay.
I mean, that to me is pretty close. So, I think instruction and indoctrination could be different. I mean, you could say if you only had indoctrination in here and not instruction, then I think it could be a concern, because then you might say, well, we're just giving some instruction in these areas. We're not trying to So I think the instruction piece is important. I think the indoctrination piece may be covered already, but I don't think it's harmful to add.
I
Okay,
still
look-
like number 2.
Yeah, I think folks in general, let's move with number 2 and we'll take a look at a clean draft, but that makes sense.
And do you want a definition of indoctrination, or do you want to leave that?
I think the definition only helps.
Yeah. Okay. Should I move on to?
Dual enrollment, please.
Yeah. Okay. So what I've done here is I've laid out in my testimony the current law on the books, the build language you have currently, which is the language from Emily at AOE, and lastly, Peter T-Shot's concept. This is not his language. I haven't asked him to review the language, but this is my interpretation of his concept. So first, let's go through the current law. So under current law, it says students to be eligible, it's a Vermont resident who has completed grade 10, but has not received a high school diploma, is eligible to participate in the program if the student is enrolled in, and then you have a Vermont public school, a public school in another state, or if you have an independent school that is designated as the public school for the district. You have 3, an approved independent school in Vermont to which the student's district of residence pays publicly funded tuition. And then you have the student could be assigned to the high school completion program or his home study. So the whole focus of this wording here in statute is around where you're enrolled and how you're enrolled, because under current law, that number 3 there, approved independent school to which is receiving publicly funded tuition, that means that only students on public tuition can get dual enrollment, right? And that's the problem you've been trying to solve. It is the problem of these students who are on private tuition from non-operating districts not being included here. So that's the current language. The current bill has the very same language all the way through, but adds the last piece on the last page of my testimony, which says, is a resident of a non-operating district enrolled in approved independent school eligible to receive public tuition. So that's the language that would protect those students who are on private tuition, who are going to like religious schools. Professor T-Shot concept, I believe, is to move away from the concept of where the students enrolled or how they're paid for. Instead focus on the courses being taken. So under his concept, I believe, it would say something like a Vermont resident who has completed grade 10, not received a high school diploma is eligible to participate if, again, it's the same language you have earlier, none of the payment will be used to support whether it's instruction or worship, etc. So basically the same language, which deals with making sure that the use of the funds is not inappropriate. And then B here on my testimony says, also, the student can't be enrolled in a recognized independent school or school or program that is not recognized for attendance purposes. So the reason that's there is under current law, we list all the schools you can go to and be on dual enrollment. This version here under Professor Teachout concepts ignores all that stuff. You only have to be a Vermont resident. But under current law, you can't have dual enrollment when you attend a recognized independent school. A recognized independent school is not an approved school. It's a school that is only recognized for purposes of truancy. So if you attend a recognized independent school, you won't be deemed to be truant. So under current law, those are included under dual enrollment. I've excluded them here as well. There's been no conversation about including them, so I've accepted them from this. And then I suppose it's possible for a student to attend a school or program that isn't recognized for truancy purposes, and that shouldn't count for sure, right? So there's two exclusions for recognized independent schools and schools that you might attend that don't even count for attendance purposes. So that's, I believe, his concept is to move away from this whole listing of all these different types of enrollment and basically make it available to all Vermont residents, except for those categories I accept at the very end there.
Senator Persley.
Would it include homeschoolers? Because they go to a dual enrollment? Because that's
Yep, because this doesn't have any under C here, Professor Teachout's concept. It's only a Vermont resident who's completed grade 10. So a homeschooler who's completed grade 10 would be qualified.
But what about B? They're not enrolled in a recognized independent school, or that's what a homeschool is a recognized program?
It is. Actually, that's a good point, though. I have to see how they're categorized in statute. So possibly B should make clear that home students are fine, right? So I can clarify that.
Yeah, Senator Chinden.
Jim, I'm sorry if I should understand this, but I'm trying to understand the distinction between what you have proposed and Professor Teachout's concept with a specific example. If I have a student that I'm paying to attend Rice High School, not doing any tuition dollars, I live in South Burlington, but I choose to put my kid in Rice High School. With Professor Teachout's concept, would my kid be eligible to get state monies with this dual enrollment program to have the state pay for my student to attend a UVM class and not in your language up above?
Yeah, so under his concept, you would be able to attend Rice on private tuition and get dual enrollment. Because the only qualification is you have to be Vermont resident.
Attend Rice and participate in dual enrollment.
Yep.
That's what you said.
On,
Okay.
on private tuition. You can't do that now because right now we have to be on public tuition, right? So you can't do that now. This will allow that because the only conditions here are Vermont resident, complete grade 10, and not receive the high school diploma.
Yeah, Senator Persley.
When in your example, I'm calling it yours, but I think what you listed as current bill, the current bill language, why wouldn't that Rice student be able to do enrollment? Because it seems like Rice could become an independent school eligible to receive public tuition if they agreed to sign the contract.
Sure. So if they are on public tuition, they're covered. They can do dual enrollment. But the example from Senator Chittenden was being on private tuition. In that case,
on private tuition and agreed to sign the contract, wouldn't they meet the definition not under the current bill?
No, they have, the student has to be on public tuition, the student. So if the student's on private tuition, even though the schools sign a contract and they can take public tuition, under current law, if the student's on private tuition, they don't get that benefit.
I just don't see that where in the current bill does it say that?
It is on I didn't number my testimony, but under current law, there's a designation three like capital letter I's, where it says improved independent school in Vermont, to which the student's district or resident pays publicly funded tuition on behalf of the student.
So,
Yes, Senator Hooker and Senator Lyons.
thank you. So, kids who are in operating districts and choose to go to a different school and pay tuition would not be eligible for dual enrollment.
Under current law, correct.
Okay, and what under Professor Teachout's language, they would?
They would, because all Vermont students are eligible under his language, except if you're going to a recognized school or it doesn't count
Right.
for truancy purposes. Yeah.
You know, on this point, may I just jump in without being recognized by the chair? So
No,
the vice.
Go ahead. Go
All
ahead.
right. So I don't know what the financial implications are of that, but Jim, as I've followed this conversation, I'm under the impression we want to accomplish what Professor Teachout is, because that is, in some sense, less discriminatory against the kids that are enrolled in private institutions, paying private dollars. They at least now still have access to this public benefit. Am I wrong in that impression?
Sorry, I'm not sure that was a legal question, so I'm not sure for sure.
Well, the discriminatory part of it, it's less discriminatory in this direction.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if discrimination is the right word for this. This is more of a public policy question, I think, in terms of how much state funds do you want to expend on this program. And I mean, yeah, so I'm not sure if it's really discrimination we're talking about in that sense, but certainly this is more inclusive, right? So this would include everybody, right? And you're excluding people now under current law.
Senator Lyon?
yeah, so you're getting right to my question. So in the bill as proposed, okay, current law, current law says no dual enrollment program for those kids who are tuitioning themselves to religious schools,
Paying the tuition.
paying
itself.
tuition.
Yeah.
The bill itself allows for those students to participate in the dual enrollment program. Peter Teachout's recommendation, and this is where want to be sure I'm clear, would mean that the child would receive full tuition to the religious school, as well as be eligible for dual enrollment. That's my question. I mean, I see here that none of the payment will go for the post-secondary institution, but is the implication that they'll receive public tuition for the school? No, okay, well, that was a misinterpretation. of something.
No, because under Peter Teachout's language, all students on either public or private tuition will be eligible for dual enrollment, full stop.
Okay,
Under the current bill language, it's interesting because the language that Emily recommended is only for non-operating districts. So that would say whether you're on private or public tuition, if you're in a non-operating district, you get dual enrollment, but that still leaves out, if you will, students from operating districts who go on private tuition to Rice would not be able to get dual enrollment under the current bill language.
Okay,
So Professor Teachout's language takes it further and allows it basically for everybody in the state.
can I ask one more
Please,
question?
yeah.
Yeah, so this is probably not a Jim question, but who's going to push back against the Peter Teachout language? It seems to me then it becomes either a misunderstanding about what the dual enrollment program is, probably, where people think we're giving money to religious schools. That this is more of a political question. So, or because it seems to me we really want the kids to take advantage of the secondary education, but there are going to be people who are against it because the kid is attending Rice or other religious school. So it becomes a matter, if we were to choose Peter Teachout's concept, then it's a matter of educating people about what dual enrollment is and is not. So just a
I mean, I
comment.
can just answer. Have pushed back on this for years and
Yeah.
have said to Peter Teachout, my fear is that an institution like Rice would get to the point, or a smaller institution would say, okay, we're not going to have history, 12th grade history anymore, but you are going to take those dual enrollment dollars and use them and take your history, your 12th grade history. And that's where I worry that then you're bringing in, you're getting rid of a history class, you're bringing in a way, it's a stretch, but public dollars that are now, you're saying, okay, we don't need that history teacher at $65,000 a year anymore. Now we're going to give those dollars to the minister, or we're going to use them in a way, it's a stretch, but that's always been sort of my concern. And Professor Teachout has always said, you could make maybe a case if that were to happen, but the reality is that would actually have to happen before a case is made. And even then it's not particularly strong. So Senator Chittenden.
So on this point, I would wonder if a way to navigate this would be to, and if we can do this in law, if a student is attending, I'm going to go with Rice High School again, and does this dual enrollment, thus giving the parent who's paying private tuition dollars, as long as that discount, as long as the state paying for that monies to that college translates to and requires Rice to reduce the tuition to Rice, which I don't know how you would programmatically do that. And I think in the way the money is going to the college, the parents getting the benefit of paying less in tuition dollars, but Rice is not getting the financial benefit of the same tuition amount that's just being subsidized by that, to address your concern, Chair Campion. I don't know if we can do that, but it might thread the needle.
It's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought
But
of it.
can I just say
Senator
one thing?
Lyons, go ahead.
Yeah, but I'm trying to understand this, because the students paying the money to Rice, the parents, let's say, they're paying money to Rice. So if the kid goes off and takes one or two courses, they may take a lot of courses under dual enrollment. The parents are losing out, but does the state have control over the dollars that the family is paying to Rice for their child to attend Rice? I mean,
Well, I think it's just a courtesy to the parents if all of a sudden Rice says there's no
Yeah,
more
but
12th grade history here.
we're
We're going to reduce your tuition because you're going to UVM to pay, with your state dollars. That's.
But we can't, we can only say what the state dollars go for. We can't
Right,
say
right.
what the parents' tuition goes
How the
to.
tuition is.
Yeah, so we can't tell Rice that they have to give a kickback. I mean,
I
I
mean, I always felt like we can do anything.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, Senator Perschlick.
I mean, dual enrollment, I think, is only for 2 classes, just to remember that. And
Yeah,
Jim, so Professor Teachout didn't propose this because he wanted to make a policy suggestion on dual enrollment. He's suggesting this because he thinks it strengthens our church and state arguments. Is that correct?
I think what he's focused on isn't really what you're talking about in terms of about how wide the availability is. I think he believes as a policy matter, it should be available to everybody, but that's only a policy point. I think his legal concern is just ensuring that the courses taken at the state's not paying for courses at the post-secondary school, which are religious instruction, right? So he's trying to avoid the state paying and bridging that gap and having a problem under the establishment clause. So I think he's just trying to limit the courses that can be taken here to make sure that they're secular.
And that might just make a stronger argument if it was to be challenged, because somebody could say like, hey, you're preventing this religious high school from teaching these children, but you're allowing this religious post-secondary school to teach these children.
Not on public, sorry.
If they're on dual enrollment and that in a religious school agrees to be part of the dual enrollment program and accept the tuition that the dual enrollment pays, a student could go to that religious school and take a religious indoctrination course.
Sure, at the high school, they could, if it's like a Rice, they could definitely take religious courses, but again, they can't use public tuition for those courses.
But where, like right now, if they wanted to go to, I don't know if St. Mike's if participates in dual enrollment or has such a course, but let's say you go to you're a student and you're in dual enrollment and you go to St. Mike's and you do like a class that's like a religious class to preparation for becoming a minister or something like that. How would that not be allowed?
That would not be allowed under Professor T-Shot's language.
Right. So that's why I'm understanding. That's why he agreed, why he thought we needed that language. He wasn't really making a comment about this is better for dual enrollment, but it makes our argument in front of a future court case stronger that we're being even, whether you're taking a religious course at a high school or at a college, we don't want public money to go to it.
Correct.
Because right now, a student could take that religious course at St. Mike's under dual enrollment.
Correct. There's no limitation.
Okay.
No. Yep.
So for that reason is why I think I like Professor Peter's suggestion.
Yeah, I do as well. Looks like we have a lot of heads nodding. Okay. Great. I think we have some consensus there, Jim.
Okay. So can I summarize where I think we are?
Well, yeah, I think, and I just want to use the word think where we are, because we've got another probably couple of weeks. It'll be the last thing that likely leaves. And I do want to touch base with our colleagues in the kingdom and others on some of this. And I might even ask you, Jim, to be willing this weekend to maybe pull some of this apart with a couple of those folks to make sure everybody is good. Because I do think the big question is going to be around what is the kid at St. Johnsbury Academy. We know that a lot of kids from New Hampshire, for example, go to St. Johnsbury Academy a lot. And I think they're also coming from choice districts or sending districts. And okay, so now I just want to make sure we're also allowing in certain circumstances, and it sounds like if we do it by state and not by mileage, students will still be able to go over there for different things. Okay. So yeah, why don't you review where you think we're at this point?
So I think where we are is that next draft will have the contractual provision instead of the certification language. It will have the indoctrination will be used with instruction, so there'll be both there, and that will be reworded a bit in accordance with the comments from the committee. Dual enrollment, you want to go in the next draft with Professor T-Shot's concept. And then I'll just mention there are a few small editorial changes he suggested as well, which I don't think we need to discuss necessarily, but I'll include those in the next draft as well.
Before you even do the draft, if you could just share with us next week the language that you would put in the draft, and then we can just have it, that will save you time, will save everybody time. I think if we could just look at it that way.
Okay, sorry. So I think the language might permeate the draft a bit.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
So I could do a draft and run it by you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, why don't we talk this weekend? Yeah,
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
that probably makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
And maybe we can send it to, around a little bit to the, Why don't you start with me and then we can go from there?
Okay.
Great. Terrific. All right. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate it. Ms. St. James, do you mind spending just a little time with us on miscellaneous ed? We'll go out of order since we probably, I know you have a 3:30 stop and we have a couple of teachers coming in on S162 at 3. So let's spend 20 minutes on miscellaneous ed. I think the first thing I just want to raise is if you would please track down in the House the language that government operations is working on that would allow public school, would allow retired teachers to return to teach, to substitute teach. That seems to be, I'm afraid that's not getting worked on. I want to put it in this bill. So if you would please send that to us and plan on Daphne, if she is there and listening, I'm sure she is, she will have you in next week on that language. Does that make sense?
Yes. So you're just looking for me to find the bill?
Did you draft it? Does it ring any bells to you? Okay.
No, I think
Yeah.
maybe Jim did.
Okay,
It's
so
still there.
if you would find that,
Mhm.
you or Jim come in next week, take us through it. I don't want to get it lost. Jim, you know what language I'm referring to?
Yeah, it was drafted by Becky Washington.
We can't hear you, Jim. Sorry.
He said it was drafted by Becky Wasserman, and that does
Okay.
ring a bell. So
Okay. Yeah, so if you could just help facilitate that, we'll have Becky in. I'm just afraid that I don't want to lose it. And I think the House is working hard over there, but I'm afraid I'm not going to see it. So,
no problem.
So I'd like that added to the miscellaneous education bill for us to consider. The other points that were raised yesterday, Secretary of Education raised questions about, I just want to raise this with the committee, back to the question of the statewide calendar. It sounded like he could give us a little report, but it's been batted around for a while. I suspect Senator Perchlik has the most history on this committee. And I know this is important as Senator Chittenden raised it. Any thoughts, committee, on how and what, again, we're really looking for here? Yeah, Senator Chittenden.
So I'm fine with dropping it. I just remember, I think it was the Ted Fisher that brought this up last year. And so I just said academic calendars are definitely worth attention. But if this has already been discussed, debated, and decided upon that it's just not going to happen as a statewide level, I'm fine with taking it out if that seems where the committee is.
No, I guess don't need to take it out. I just want to, we might just need to specify a little bit more. Senator Perchlik?
Well, I thought, and I didn't really get my question to Secretary French quite so direct as maybe I should have. And the question is like, if AOE had the power to just create a statewide contract, would they want that power? Would they do it? Or, because I think that's the only way it's really going to happen. Like he explained, when you tried to do it in a, go around the state and say, what's the best thing? I mean,
We're talking calendar, right? Statewide calendar.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you said contract, but but maybe
sorry.
I just want to make sure maybe there's a connection there.
No. I was
Okay.
misspoke. Yeah, the calendar. I mean,
Okay,
they would want to have a public input process for sure, but in the end, the secretary would just say, okay, here's the state calendar, and some people won't like it. And the question is, do we want to do that or not? And I'm not advocating one way or the other, but I think another study is not a good use of anybody's time.
Yeah. What if we were to, just for now, Ms. St. James, to make everybody nervous that's watching, say something like, please come back with the plan to institute a new statewide, something like that, or just something around, giving people 3 years to institute a statewide calendar. I think Senator Perchlik is right. And we can hear from the secretary on this to see if they want to push back. If it's going to take a lot of time, I might just postpone the conversation and toss it, if we have time, onto the House bill that's on our wall later. But maybe we can kind of play with that language. I agree, it's been studied. And maybe, Ms. St. James, if you have, probably don't, but if you could help us get the most recent study on the statewide calendar, that might also be helpful for us to see.
Sure, I can reach out to AOE, and
Okay.
I think it was Jay Nichols who was also on that
Okay.
committee. I can also touch base with him. So are you asking to change the language in section 4 to, instead of a study, just require the creation of a statewide calendar?
Yeah, we'll just see. I mean, we may pull it, but it gets us more in the direction that we want to move in. We don't want it studied anymore, likely. And we could take a look at the study, one of the studies that's been done, and yeah. Again, I do, my instinct on this is that we probably will pull it before we pass it. And we could set it aside. And if we need to send something over to the House later this session, we would do so. What does the committee think of that? Does it sound okay? Yes,
I
Senator
do
Hooker.
want to go back to the secretary's comments about, what's the purpose? Why do you want to do this? And I liked what he said. I thought he made an argument for a uniform calendar about access to CTEs, and certainly with public health issues that we've experienced throughout the pandemic, it seems that there are arguments for it. So I think that we need to come up with some ideas as to why we think that this would be something that should take the time of AOE and the
Yeah,
rest.
that's right. It's a good reminder. And that's why we're having this discussion. I appreciate it, Senator Hooker. The connection between what just happened with the pandemic, what continues to happen, and the need for a statewide calendar. So maybe, Ms. St. James, you could start, if you wouldn't mind, putting some of that language in there also as our reasoning for moving in this direction. And we can add something to that. Senator Lyons.
I don't know, just pretty basic that families and their kids need to have the same times off.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
It's just, it's silly sometimes when you see what happens to schedules.
But just help me understand this again. If you're in South Burlington, for example, are all the schools, does it vary from school to school?
I don't know about South Burlington, but
Okay.
I know that all the Chittenden South District schools are all off at the same time, but they might be off at a time different from South Burlington or
I see, yeah.
Burlington. And so,
Where you might also have
yeah,
kids.
so if you're commuting to work one place, your kids are at the other place.
Yeah.
Thomas
Senator,
Senator Chin.
My lovely wife works in the Colchester School District and my kids go to South Burlington. And so we do notice that every now and then they have the day off. My wife does not. It's few and far between, but where you get a lot of the differences are in-service days. So the districts do a lot of variation. So they might choose an in-service day on this day, which puts parents in a bind in those circumstances. So I think it's worth looking at for our efficiency.
absolutely. So another reason, Ms. St. James, in addition to what we just learned coming while we're still in the pandemic, good for teachers, good for families, moms and dads who are teachers, making certain that they're off at the same time. Just again, another good reason to move in this direction. Anything else on this? Okay, maybe we'll get there. I mean, it certainly makes sense. It's a small state, and I get it. I hadn't even thought about the teacher component. And yeah, if you're in teaching in one district and your kids are off, and we are trying to take steps as much as we possibly can to make this state as attractive as it possibly can be, or even more so for people to have a teaching career here. Okay, and then there was, what followed that, Ms. St. James, the other issue that Secretary of Education raised?
Report and recommendations for statewide remote learning policy.
Yeah, so I think sounds like he's good with that. Sounds like that's a great addition. And then if you could go up to more, I think it's the third one. Does he?
Third one is the standardizing a report and recommendation on the impact of standardizing the entrance age threshold for public school kindergarten.
And I have to go back and take a look at my notes or listen, but I don't know if he had concerns about that, Ms. St. James. You have something? In your notes?
I'm trying to remember. I watched it this morning, and I believe he really focused his comments on section 5. I don't remember anything about specific about the in support on one side or the other about this section.
Okay, Senator Chinden.
I remember his comments was really just that don't expect too much. He said, it might come back with like a 1-page report, but I still think that's worth doing because it's just
fine,
asking the question. I think having leaders think, would there be value in having consistency here? Might open up the right conversations.
Okay. Senator Hooker, anything else? I saw that you were, is that what you wanted
That's
to
what I
say?
was going to say. I remember
Okay.
him saying that it would be a short report.
Yeah. The other piece of this bill that I need to work on a little bit this weekend with with CCV and others is the refugee piece, and making certain that we have the language. I think we do need some language changes there because we would not be actually getting the work done that we had set out to possibly do this year with Afghani refugees because of the term we're using. And so I will reach out to Joyce, Judy, and see if we can get some additional language. And I'll be in touch this weekend, Ms. St. James.
And I can offer is if I know that the population you are intending to reach with this is the people from Afghan who have been resettled here. I'm trying to not use the term refugee, and I can also reach out to one of my colleagues who works on refugee issues and see if she has any suggestions now that I know that that's the specific population.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yep.
Actually, that would be probably more useful than having me reach out to Joyce, Judy at this point. That would be great. Maybe my last words, but this miscellaneous ed bill, it doesn't seem particularly controversial. I think where it's a lot of just tidying things up, putting a few things in there. I appreciate you reaching out to Ms. Wasserman and getting the language for, and then hoping to leave committee maybe Thursday or Friday of next week. So we still have time. We'll hear from a couple of other folks on this, but at this point, I think we're okay. Okay, you have enough? Okay.
I think so. Mm-hmm.
All right, so we'll hold off on mascots at this point. Still want that to leave hopefully next week as well. But given that we have some teachers coming in, I just want to give everybody a quick break. And you've got a 3:30 stop. I think we're good right now. Anything else before we just take a quick break until 3 o'clock? Ms. St. James?
No, thank you.
Okay, great.